Trigger warning, this episode discusses topics such as sexual assault, rape, and different forms of gender-based violence, which some listeners may find upsetting. Hello everyone, welcome back to a new episode of Juicy Conversations. Today we are discussing the not so fun topics of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa's murders as we try and identify the problems, but also the solutions to the different forms of gender-based violence we've seen in the UK and around the world, and how societies enable these tragedies to continue to happen and how we can hopefully look at making sure that they don't happen again. If you like this episode and the podcast, don't forget to give it a rating and a review, to follow GC Conversations on all streaming and social media platforms. And as always, the DMs are open if you have any questions, ideas, or if you simply want to take the conversation further. In the meantime, it's time for me to welcome my guests. So welcome. If you guys want to start by quickly introducing yourselves, and then we'll get into the topics of today.
Hi, I'm Harriet. I'm a recent University of Surrey student, and I've been working in sort of the domestic abuse sector for sort of over a year now. I'm a helpline advisor at a domestic abuse charity, so I have a lot to say on these topics.
Hi, I'm Atia, and I'm a master's student in magazine journalism at City University. I care a lot about women's safety and feminism, as well as a lot of issues to do with race, so I just feel like I have a lot to say on this topic as well.
And for anyone who is listening to this for the first time, I'm Julie, I'm the host. I'm a politics and economics graduate and also a former student journalist, kind of freelance journalist. I write and talk about feminism and racism as well a lot. And yeah, felt like I definitely had a lot to say about today's topics. So today we're going to be speaking about Sabina Nessa's death. We're going to be talking about Sarah Everard's case, which has just been completely kind of solved in the past couple of days, and about just street harassment, women's safety in the UK, in the world, and what can be done. Just as to anyone that doesn't know, Sabina Nessa, there is a post actually on my Instagram, Juicy Conversations Instagram, but she was found murdered in a park in Southeast London last week now. It would have been just over a week ago. Her potential killer has been found since and charged with murder. She was just, I think, meeting a friend, 5-minute walk away from her house, and never made it there. And Sarah Everard died in March of this year, March 2021. She was abducted, raped, and murdered by a man who turned out to be a former police officer. He was a former police officer. And so obviously as women, I think that got us all a bit riled up, a bit worried, a bit scared, a bit heartbroken. I think there was a lot of mixed feelings on social media. People have been talking about it, sharing their experiences, sharing their fears, their frustration at the system, at the patriarchy, at men in general, at women for not standing up for each other more, just at everything. So to start us off, when you read about Sabina Nessa and about Sarah Everard and about what happened 2 days ago where her murderer got sentenced to life and it was revealed exactly what had happened on that night, what were kind of your thoughts and your feelings towards it?
I think one of my first thoughts, was probably anger. I feel like, as with a lot of women at the moment, I speak to my auntie about this yesterday, who obviously, understandably, was very upset about it because she has a young girl who's 15, 16, and you teach them from a young age that if they're in trouble, they should go and find a police officer. And we all know there are a lot of issues with the police, that need to be fixed, but usually that's sort of a rule that they teach kids. And then when we found out that actually he'd used the fact he was a police officer to get her into that situation and to then, further kidnap and murder her. I think it was a case of, just pure anger and hatred for a system that could allow that to go ahead, and also people that could see that it was going to happen eventually. This, guy was known for things similar to this beforehand, but still let it get further. And then obviously, after that, there's all the feelings of, shame and should we be doing more? Should we, the guilt of not having done enough to stop things like that happening further and things like that. But I think sort of the anger was the main one. You think that Sarah Everard was March of this year, and you want to think that some change has been made, and then there's been, I think it's 60 or 70 women murdered at the hands of men since then. And anger is all that you can really feel.
So like when obviously Sarah Everard was murdered in March, but I found out about Sabina like right before I moved to London, and so that just kind of instills more fear. I mean, you're moving to a new place, but to know that 2 women were murdered, like, and they're national cases now, right before you move, it just makes it more scarier. And my sister-in-law, she's related to Sabina Nessa as well, so that kind of makes it more personal, because it doesn't feel like when you see something happen to someone and you're like, that can't happen to me, but then when things do start to happen to people closer to you, it just brings it more home, and then you think that could be me next, So I think, obviously there's a lot of anger, but also a lot of fear, because especially when I read Sarah's case, I was just like, there's nothing more we can do as women to keep ourselves safe at this point. Like, it's literally like when the government says, women need to be more safe, I'm like, what more can we do? At this point, if you want us to be more safe, it sounds like you're just trying to make us stay at home rather than live our lives.
Definitely. I think for me, it was 2 things. Before I even got to anger, it was pure shock. I think Sabina Nessa's case even more, because not to like compare or say that one was worse than the other, but it was just the fact that, one, I didn't necessarily hear from it in the press and stuff like that. I heard from it through social media, because somebody somewhere decided that why is no one speaking about this, and started speaking about it more. So for me to kind of grasp what was happening, and then it's when you see it was 8:30, so it wasn't even that late. Streets would have still been packed. It's in London, which is always busy anyways. 8:30 at this time of the month, it's not dark. And she was going 5 minutes away from hers. And the same feeling hit me as you, Atia, of like, well, what more can we do? Because at this point, if we can't go 5 minutes away from our homes, if we can't go to a friend's house and then just decide to walk and not take public transport or an Uber or whatever, which isn't always safer anyways, because something is going to happen to us. If we have to always be out in broad daylight accompanied by other men or other women, like, there are just no solutions. And also I was just heartbroken, extremely fearful as well, because in Sabina Nessa's case, it was literally a 5-minute attack. It was just there, and then she was there, and then she wasn't. And in that case, it's really just a random guy taking out his anger on what so far we think is a stranger to him. And Sarah Everard's, it was the same thing, because I think we've discussed this on another episode, but I think a lot of women are kind of conditioned, I know it's my case, for example, to kind of become okay with the fact that at some point in our lives, we might have to go through some form of sexual assault. And so you kind of live always being reminded of that and always being aware of that. But when you find out that, this happened, and that she was killed after, and that it was a police officer, exactly, people that we were trained and taught that we can trust and that we should go to with issues, it does hit different when you put all these factors together. And then you have people turning around and be like, well, this is how you can be safe. But this list keeps on changing, because it used to be wear bright clothes and running shoes, but then it's not enough. It's always make sure that you're walking places that are well lit up and that have CCTV. How are we supposed to know if there's CCTV around or not? And then it becomes, okay, we do that and we don't go too far away and we go when it's busy. And it's still an issue. It's just never ending, because these girls, there's never anything wrong that can be done, but these girls literally stereotypically followed every single guideline that a woman has been given to stay safe.
I think even with Sarah Everard, obviously, with the news about how he was able to kidnap her and everything, a lot of people are saying that, there would have been plenty of people around when that happened. But if I was to see someone getting arrested, you generally, obviously it's not always the case, definitely not, but you would assume that there's a reason, and it's like, oh, okay, something's going on, you've missed on the first half of something, clearly something has happened, and that's that. Whereas there would have been loads of people that would have seen that, not even batted an eyelid because they just assumed that was just a police officer going about their business and doing their job. It's like, even if you do follow every single rule, in quotes, but then what are you supposed to do after that? Because someone will still abuse the power that they've been given and will still put you in a situation like her, where she probably couldn't have said anything because she thought she was being arrested for breaking lockdown or whatever it was that he claimed that he'd said.
Yeah, because so to anyone that doesn't know, what we found out is that he lured her in. All we knew is kind of he was a police officer. She disappeared there and then was found in a forest near where he lives. But what we found out through the trial is that he actually lured her in by using his power as a police officer and by stating that she'd broken COVID-19 guidelines. So that's how the conversation started, then handcuffed her and then drove her back to where he raped and murdered her. And there were testimonies from people who were walking by at that point who thought, well, we just thought it was a police arrest. And not only would you, in a lot of cases, not really think too much about it because you think they're doing their job, there's a protection status with the police, but there's also a hierarchy to it. They are here to make sure that people are not breaking the law. So I'm not saying there's a level of fear, but you wouldn't necessarily see yourself getting between a citizen and a police officer because, one, you would assume that the police officer is in the right, and two, they kind of have the power. So you're then putting yourself in a situation that could escalate into something where you're at risk. So it's just, in that case, I don't think anyone could have done anything more, and especially not her. And it's just, it makes it even worse, the fact that she was actually manipulated into being kidnapped.
Yeah, kind of like leading on from that about what a woman can do to be safe. I was watching this TikTok this week, and this woman was crying on it, and she was saying how she had this scary experience in a taxi. And she's saying she was alone in this taxi. And I mean, I've been in a taxi alone, and I always have my phone on the ready, just because, you are alone in a car with a strange man. So there is also that fear. And she was saying how the taxi driver was just being nice and asking questions. And I think he asked her where she lives. And without kind of thinking about it, she kind of gave the area where she lived. And as soon as she said that, she realized oh, I just told this strange man where I lived. And she automatically regretted saying that. And then this taxi driver was being really pushy and started saying oh, I have this house nearby there. If you want, I can take you there right now and we can check it out. And she was just saying no, that's fine. I don't really want to go. And then he was like, okay, fine, well, give me your number and then I can take you there some other day. And at this point, she was kind of getting a bit nervous and scared. So she said, just give me your number and I'll call you later. Obviously, she wouldn't have done that. So she took his number, and then he was saying how she hadn't called him yet, so he couldn't save her number. And then she said, I'll call you when I get home. And she made him drop her off at another street that wasn't her home street because she was too scared to actually go to her actual house. And once she got out of the car, she went to this random woman and asked her, this man is being quite creepy. Can you just pretend to talk to me like you're my friend for a little while until he goes? So she was talking to this woman, and the woman was saying, he's still not going. He's just waiting there for you. And so she was crying on this TikTok video because she realized how scary it could have been if she had been alone and he was waiting for her. And I was reading the comment section, and it was just a bunch of men saying, oh, you're overreacting. There's nothing dangerous about that situation. You made this taxi driver lose his job because of that. Why are women so, dramatic? And it led me thinking how, let's say she didn't get out that car and she stayed in it and something happened to her. People would have said, why did she stay in that car and let him take her there? But because she didn't do that and she put her safety first, these same people are saying, why did she overreact? And it's kind of no matter what we as women do, it's never going to be good enough. If we're being cautious and trying to stay safe, people will say, you're overreacting. There's nothing wrong with this man. He's not being creepy. He's just trying to be nice. But then when we don't stay cautious, or we give in to peer pressure, they say, why did we do that? So it's kind of like, you know, going back to this thing about, I don't think the rhetoric should be what can women do to stay safe anymore, because clearly, like, we can't do enough anyway. But it should be, how do we stop men from committing these violence? Because really, at the end of the day, they're the perpetrators. You know, it's not our fault we're getting, you know, killed in our parks or taken from the street. You know, it's men who are doing these things.
Yeah, just with this narrative of like you're being dramatic or you're not being safe enough, I think it just comes from the fact that society has been built, and it isn't necessarily today's men's fault, but it is their fault for not trying to change it and from choosing to just profit from it. But society has been built, however many centuries back it goes, in a way where your first instinct as a woman, as a man, as a non-binary person, as anyone, should be to try and take the blame away from the man. How can we find an excuse to justify a man's behavior? It's always the boys will be boys narrative, and it's just a compliment, and if you don't want this, you shouldn't do that. And it's just never ending. But that's just how society is built, and that's how people think. Men are raised by parents that were raised by parents that teach them from generation to generation, you are not wrong, you should get what you want. And I think that is the root of the issue, is just that, one, there's never any blame put on them because we actively try as a society to just get all of the blame shifted away from them. And also, society teaches boys not to respect women. I was having this conversation earlier with a friend. I'm not talking about boys and men individually, but as a social group, men don't have any form of respect towards the social group that is women, and do not have any cisgender heterosexual men do not have any form of respect towards any other gender at all. And it's just because cisgender men kind of run society, they're at the top, so they're literally taught that the only way to stay at the top is by treating the rest of us as their inferiors. But that's just what you realize, because these two women really shut everyone up who was like, well, in that case, she didn't do enough. In that case, she did too much. In that case, she overreacted. Because it's like, where was anything done wrong? Try and put any blame on anyone but the man in the situation, and it really makes everyone think. But then that's the thing, is it escalates. I remember, I think it was last Friday, I was in London, so I just found out about Sabina, Nessa, and then the next morning I had to get up really early to come back to Guildford and go to work. So I was in the streets at like 6. So it wasn't very crowded. It was still pretty dark, and obviously all that was on my mind was her case. It had just happened, and I was genuinely terrified. Like terrified. At first I was on like a big main road and there was loads of traffic. So I was like, it's fine. There's cars. If somebody just takes me, somebody will see. So okay. But then I had to take some back roads because I was going to a train station, and I had to go through residential areas, and it got like darker and darker and there was less and less light. And I just remember thinking, if something happens to me, nobody will know, nobody will see. And it would take people ages to even realize, because work are just going to think I didn't show up. For them to, they're not going to call my parents. My partner is going to think I'm at work, so if I'm not messaging, won't be alerted by that. My family lives in a different country, so for them to be kind of like, oh, we haven't heard from Julie in a while, it would have to be a matter of days. So, and I was just terrified. And then I got to the station, I was fine. I kept thinking like, as soon as you get to the station, you'll be okay. And I remember thinking like, if I was to tell anyone this, they'd probably feel like I was overreacting. But that's the thing, is I know like there was a higher chance of me getting to Guildford safe, which happened. But there is still an increasing chance at this rate that I wouldn't have made it. And the fact that I even have to go through these thoughts of like, oh, what if something did happen to me? Or like looking around you and feeling like, well, I'm stuck here. Like if something happens, I can't do anything to defend myself. That's the root of the issue, is we do not know what to do to feel safer. And because as women, we ourselves can't find the solution, it goes back to what you're saying, Atia, that surely it must mean that the problem is not coming from us, however much people try and prove that it does.
Yeah, like I was talking to this woman today who worked at this coffee shop, and she was telling me that, so this was on Bethnal Green Road, and I was kind of asking her about what the area was like, and she was saying like, oh, if you want to move here, don't. And I was just like, oh, like, can you clarify, like, why do you think that? And she was saying how she does not feel safe there at all, especially in the night. And she was saying how she had this incident where she's walking on the street and this group of men approached her and they wanted her number, and she was like, sorry, I'm married. And this one guy spat at her and was like, you're ignorant. So like, we live in a society where men feel like they're entitled to spit at a woman. I mean, like, that's never even occurred to me, like, oh, I could potentially spit at someone. Like, that's never happened to me. And I feel like even if someone was being rude to me in the street, I still wouldn't even think about spitting on them. But it's the fact, like, how entitled do you have to be to like go to that extent just because a woman refused to give you her number? And I think that just proves how bad it is in our society, that like men feel like they can get away with behavior like this. And it really annoys me because in my head I'm like, well, this violence isn't just this random thing that's happening from like mysterious like events. It's, and like what happened to Sarah and what happened to Sabina, they're not isolated incidents, because there's a whole, like, I'm sure like if you Google it, every day we can find a woman that went missing or the sexual assault that happened. So clearly it's not isolated events, they're all related, and they all stem from the fact that we live in a society that doesn't hold men accountable for their actions.
I think even obviously with that, the group of people that started that woman, even if that was only one man that started that woman, there was a group of men with him. There were other men around. There were, there would have been plenty of people on the street as well that probably saw it. But because not only do men aren't held accountable for their actions, men also don't hold other people to account. So it's even the few of them that don't like we've said, men as a group don't respect women. Even the few that do, when other people do things like that, when they spit at someone, when they attack someone, or even they make lewd jokes at someone, or they touch someone inappropriately, things like that, their friends, their colleagues, their family members, they don't say anything about it. They just allow it to continue. They say, oh, he's just joking, or they'll say that person isn't that sort of guy, so if it went any further they would still stick by them and they'd still be their friend and things like that. And it's like, well, that's the reason that male violence against women is becoming essentially an epidemic, because nothing is being done, because all the blame gets shifted away from the man. And then when you get cases like this where they cannot shift the blame anywhere but the men that attacked and murdered these poor women, they then go, okay, well, there's nothing that we can do about it now, or they will put them in prison, but they won't change anything after the fact. They'll say, actually, we've dealt with that one person, even the man who murdered Sarah Everard, he's in prison for life with no opportunity to get released. And I think that was the first police officer to be ever given that sentence. But even that, he was a police officer. They're not doing anything to change the fact that there are other police officers like this. They're not doing anything to change the fact that other people are acting like this. They're treating them as sort of isolated incidents when, like Atia said, they're not. They're constant, and they're all related to each other just by the nature of who is doing the crime and to who.
Yeah. It's just because that's exactly it. It's just people are just going to leave it at that. People think that's justice. And I think it was Bethany Dawson, amazing journalist, you should all check her out, who tweeted, I think she's writing an article about this. She was like, how do you feel about him being sentenced? Do you feel safer? Do you feel not? DM me with any thoughts. And I jokingly replied to her story. I was like, I don't feel any better. Still don't trust men. Still don't really trust the police. Sarah Everard should still be here. Gender-based violence is still an issue. Like, this isn't a win. We shouldn't be excited that there was justice. Like, these people not only abused their power, but even if they'd been any person in the world, they murdered for no valid reason, because there's never a valid reason to just take someone else's life. You don't get to decide who lives and who doesn't. But like, and we were supposed to be happy or be relieved. Sarah Everard's killer, the detail, I won't go into them because there's not enough trigger warnings for that. But if you want to find out, there's articles. But the violence and the premeditation and just how sick the crime is. I mean, thank everything that he got life in prison. He deserves no less. And it's not a victory. It's just exactly what should happen. And it's exactly what he was employed to do, to make sure that people like him didn't commit these crimes. The real victory would have been for that to not happen in the first place. Because if you're nicknaming a police officer a rapist, which according to many articles was the case, clearly there's something wrong with it. Rape is not funny. Rape culture is not funny. You should never be making jokes about someone being a bit rapey or a full-on rapist. You should never take it lightly. And as there are people who recruit them, somebody should have pulled him in and checked that he wasn't going to do anything about it, because he did. And I think he was arrested a couple of times for public indecency as well. It's just like, how much does it take for you to realize and for you to just protect us? But it just comes down to what I was saying initially. Men run the world. So obviously society does not recognize women's rights in a lot of cases. And we're sitting here from this UK that at least recognizes the bare minimum. So like in other countries, it's even worse, where women can't drive, women can't vote, women can't go to school. Like, so we live in a society where we're not recognized and we're not respected. And then there's also the issue of like, man can't take no. Again, it goes back to what we were saying about education. Mothers and fathers raise boys to think that they should be able to get whatever they want. Of course, when they're then in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, and they've been raised thinking you will have exactly what you want all the time. Nobody should ever say no to you. That's what happens. You get spat at, or you get hit, or you say no, and you have to have unwanted sexual relations anyways, because just men don't listen. They're just like, what? You don't want to sleep with me? But this is just toxic masculinity and fragility that comes from the fact that we raise them to think that they are owed everything in life, including sex and female attention. And that's just where we've gone wrong from the very start.
I think even with people saying no to them, most people sort of, especially around our age, especially sort of in the university scene, if a guy is bothering you, your default reaction is to say that you have a boyfriend, because they respect the man that you are with more than they respect your right to say no, which I think is ridiculous. And you think that, oh, okay, maybe they'll grow out of it, maybe when enough people say no to them. But actually what happens is enough people say no to them that they then snap, and then when the next time someone says no to them, they do hit them, or they do spit at them, or they take it even further. And then it's on the responsibility of that person, that girl, for saying no. And they should have just dealt with it, or been more polite, or just take it as a compliment and things like that, when actually that person is harassing them, and that harassment in itself should be illegal. Street harassment should be, but it's the fact that they can't do anything else, because if they say no, they won't accept that. If they say, actually, I've got a boyfriend, even then they won't accept that. And if you're not in a situation where you can get someone else involved, you are then in fear of your safety. And then it's that woman's fault for not finding help, for not calling someone, for not just walking away, when actually that person would escalate the situation a lot quicker if you did decide to just walk away from the situation.
Yeah, and like I was also reading this article as well, and it's by the Telegraph, which should say enough about what kind of article it would be. But they were basically trying to humanize Wayne Couzens, and they were saying how he was this nice man and how his colleagues never expected this from him. And I was just like, do we really have to humanize this rapist? Like, is it actually important that some of his co-workers, or even that his mother-in-law, thought he was this very nice guy? Like, clearly he wasn't. Even after being exposed as a monster, men still have the leeway to then be given the sympathy. And it's like, even after women are brutally murdered, we're just left in the dust to be forgotten about. It's like Sarah and Sabina. They had so much going for them. They were very bright women. And it's like, where's all that stuff? Like, why are we still focusing on Wayne?
I think me and Julie were talking about this yesterday, because we mentioned that, if I found out that anyone near me had done anything like that, my first response wouldn't be to defend them, whether you're the mother of them, or a co-worker, or a friend. Even if it's your best friend, your first response shouldn't be to defend them and say they're not that type of person, I could never imagine them doing this. Because first off, you don't know what type of person they are. If someone has come forward and said, actually, I do think they did this, or I've witnessed them doing this, things like that, then statistically speaking, it's a higher likelihood that they're going to have done that, and you're just going to be the one defending them when you shouldn't. But I think even in the case of Sarah Everard's murderer, his colleagues did think he was capable of doing something like this. You know, he'd done
Yes.
similar things before.
Yes.
He'd been arrested for indecent exposure. He was nicknamed the rapist at work. Family, I can sort of understand saying that, 'cause they don't want to think that he could do that. But even so, the evidence is there. He's been arrested. He's been sentenced. At that stage, you should accept that he did it, and it's not your job to then defend him, because he shouldn't be getting defended.
Yeah.
But I think, especially when you look at situations like that and go, if he was a decorated police officer whose colleagues knew he was dodgy and probably could have suspected him of doing something like this, but didn't even do anything, then you think, okay, well, what good do the rest of us have? Because some guy you work with, or some person at university, or a friend or family member could have been like that. They could have people think the same things of them, but if no one is willing to say anything or do anything, then what are you supposed to do in the future? How are you supposed to say, okay, well, if we ignore the list of things that women should do to protect themselves, and you just go, okay, well, you just don't hang around with people that are likely to do those things. It's like, okay, well, you don't know who they are.
Exactly.
But the people that do know who they are, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to say anything. They just go, oh, okay, it's fine, because they're not usually like that. And they wouldn't do that to someone when, we now know for a fact that he did.
But also, like, I kind of want to say, it's kind of a give. I mean, thank God that not everyone is capable of that. That you don't just go around and you're like, him? Yeah, I think he'd be capable of kidnapping, raping, and murdering a woman. Like, of course, you wouldn't expect it of most people. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that, we're not saying that we expected him to be a monster, or that he had the profile of a monster. We're saying that no matter where he's from, what he did, who he's married to, who his mom is, where he shops, that he has a dog, he is one. Full stop. And the thing with humanizing it is, again, it's bringing it as an individual issue. Why do we need to humanize him? We could be spending words, budget, and using platforms to show, like, look, this is atrocious, but also let's look at what this highlights. This highlights issues with toxic masculinity. This highlights issues of the patriarchy oppressing women. This just security issues for women and marginalized gender, and then women of color. Because if you go down and you try and be intersectional and you go down the minorities, it becomes worse and worse for every single minority there is. If you spend that energy looking at that, people like him won't exist anymore, because they won't be able to flourish in a society that allows them to do that. No one is born a serial killer or a rapist. They grow up like that because we put the wrong things in their head, and they let them think that they can get away with things like this. It just isn't relevant. I don't care that he was a good guy or that you didn't expect it from him. It's not even a matter of did you not. It's just not really relevant. The conversation really doesn't revolve around him at all.
Yeah, and like, I think adding on from that, Julie, it's the fact that someone greenlit this article. Someone thought, like, that's okay. And that just speaks to the wider issue of these kinds of people exist in the media. They can be like the editors of certain newspapers and magazines that have more control over what gets said about the Sarah's case or Sabina's case. And they think like this as well. I think it just shows how not much has changed, because if you just go back to like the 1960s with the Yorkshire Ripper case, the media then was also trying to humanize him by trying to say, like, he's a family man, he was like this, blah, blah, blah. And it just shows like that kind of thinking hasn't changed, that no matter what a man does, people will still be like, but how could he have done this? He had kids, as if that makes him automatically this great person. And like, kind of going on from like the Yorkshire Ripper thing, I remember in that Yorkshire Ripper documentary, how because there was this serial killer going around killing women, the government basically put a curfew on women. And I was thinking, well, to be honest, I can see that happening now as well. Like, I can see the government saying, clearly it's not safe for women, so we advise you guys to stay at home past 6 p.m. I can totally see that happening. And back in the 1960s when that happened, women didn't accept that. They literally marched on the streets. And I'm kind of so angry that I like want to march on the streets and just be like, I'm so sick of not feeling safe and feeling like I can be killed just by walking to the shops, and that impacting how like I get somewhere, and the fact that you even have to think about that. And like I was walking down the streets today, and I feel like I've always been quite cautious and paranoid about the fact that, you know, you could get kidnapped, blah, blah, blah. But it's been like during the night. But now, like, it doesn't matter what time of day it is. It doesn't even matter if I feel like it's quite a safe street. I just don't feel safe anymore. And I'm tired of that. I feel like that's been taken away from me. And like most, if not all women, the fact that we just can't exist without feeling like we're in danger anymore, and that just really makes me mad.
Yeah, and if you think about it, and I'm sure, Harry, you'll have things to say about it given the nature of your job, like it's not even a we don't feel safe outside, is you come back and a lot of people just in general are brought up by abusive, whether it's emotionally, physically, or sexually abusive parents, family members, family friends. So you get to that, then you grow up, you marry someone who ends up beating you, raping you, and just abusing you for years and years on end. And then you go out, you go to meet a friend for 5 minutes. It's a 5 minute walk away, and someone just stabs you or hits you in the head for no apparent reason. You go to your friend's house and you can't walk back to yours. And like it's just never ending, because it's not even a matter of like, yeah, I don't feel safe when I'm in the streets. Oh, I don't feel safe wearing certain things. It's you just never feel safe as a woman at all, because men just have the power to abuse you if they just feel like it. And coincidentally, I've been rewatching R. Kelly's case with my partner, because he didn't know about it, and I was like, you need to watch this. And he was just like, I don't understand how a man can do this to women. And I was like, well, it's just the power trip of like, you are a thing to me. Like, this man had a full-on sex cult, like, and was telling all his sex slaves at this point when they could go to the bathroom, when they can eat, to call him daddy. He just raped them day after day after day after day, filmed them. And it's just like, well, it's just because he doesn't value women as people, as humans. He just sees them as as objects that are just here to satisfy his needs.
I think it's also a case of, even if that does happen to someone, if you're, even if you are just wandering around the streets and then it happens, I think a lot of people know that if they were to report that, if they were to tell anyone about it, namely the police or any sort of institution where you'd expect something to then be done about it, that the likelihood is it won't get very far. I think there's the stat we were talking about yesterday, Julie, that's like 5% of rape cases that go to the police end in some sort of prosecution. It's like 5% of an already lower number, because not everyone reports it, because people look at these statistics and go, nothing's going to happen, so why should I report it? And then you go, okay, well, people are just going to keep having these power trips and this controlling behavior, because they know that they get off on the fact that no one's going to do anything. The amount of victims of not just domestic abuse, but any form of violence, things like that, a lot of the time the situation is that they don't tell anyone because the other person has told them that no one will believe them. And the majority of people know that that is true. You could tell your friends, you could tell your family, and chances are they will believe you, or you'd hope so in a lot of cases. But even if you tell your employer, or you tell a university if you're at school or anything like that, or you go and tell the police, they'll say, we can report it, we can log it, we can take a report, we can ask questions and interview. But if you don't have evidence that happened, if they don't have a definitive way to show to the court that this was the person that did it and this is exactly what they did, then they just give up and they don't take it any further. And obviously, a lot of, there are still some police officers who do care and who do want to get people the help they need. But if as an institution the help isn't there, if as an institution it won't go any further, then why would you expect people to be able to report things and expect the sort of the cycle to end? And it's a case of that money that goes towards funding the campaigns for people to be defended from their crimes and things like that, and all the money to quieten people down about issues that are happening, that should be going into the system that needs fixing. It should be money that is changing the fact that cases don't get anywhere, especially with violence against women, especially when it's done by men. Those cases they don't get very far, and then it's just this endless cycle that actually you need to fix, otherwise it will just keep happening. But if they continue to see them as sort of isolated incidents that only ever happen to one person, and then we condemn that person. But we also, say that person's a great guy and he didn't do anything like this. Then in in a circle, it's just going to keep coming back to, well, of course the thing is going to happen again. People don't report it, because people don't pick up on it when it is reported, even at the early stages. If someone reports someone harassing them, that person shouldn't be allowed to do that ever again, let alone escalate and make it 10 times worse, and have 3 indecent exposure arrests on their record before they then take it further and kidnap someone. Like, it just shouldn't be like that.
Kind of like adding on from what you were saying, Harriet, about how the police don't take it seriously at the first kind of step. So how do we as women keep on going back to them? I was reading this report that was saying basically that during the pandemic, especially with each lockdown, stalking cases had rose like exponentially, especially for women, where they were just being followed at home. And because they were at home, it was easier for stalkers to kind of get them where they were. And I think we can all like understand that stalking cases aren't really taken seriously by the police. They don't really do anything about it. When women go to them, they're kind of just like, oh, like, try not to be alone in certain places and stuff like that. And nothing is actually done, when in certain cases, it's actually really severe, like the amount of stalking that's being done to these women. And I would say like stalking is like one of the first signs, and then you get violence after that. So if police don't take stalking seriously, I just think, the police actually need to like do some serious training and just reorganization, but also just redoing everything in the system to take women more seriously. I know it's worse as well when you're a POC woman, because they take you even less seriously. So it's just like, like, how are we meant to keep on going back to them for safety when they never believe us anyway?
Yeah. And it's just with the stalking, like if you take a show like You, like great show. Well, I mean, great show, no. But I watched it. It's great. But it basically glorifies the act of a stalker, because as someone who's viewed it, I'll be fully honest, I find it repulsive what this guy does, but also I find his character quite likable. And at first I thought, like, what is wrong with me? And then I spoke with my sister and we were like, well, it's not us that are sick. This character was written to be likable. This character is romanticized to the point where you literally kind of like him as a person. And it's like, well, how do I hate but I like you? And it's just, but that's the thing. And it's almost making a mockery of what is a real issue. Another form again of gender-based violence, because when we say violence, it doesn't have to be murder. Violence can also be psychological, and having a stalker psychologically can do so much damage. You literally have no control over it goes over control over your freedom and your safety. You don't even have control over your own space and your own intimacy. And yeah, it goes exactly to what you were saying, Atiya, and what we've said all along, that this is the issue, is that the first step is you go to the police and you might get a police officer that doesn't take you seriously. Why? Because that's how society was built. Women are dramatic and should learn to just suck it up and shut up. And now that they're opening their mouths, finally, after centuries of like shutting up, people are like, oh, come on, slow down, calm down. You're being dramatic. Then you get someone that actually believes you, that wants to take it further. You then have a whole system and you have institutions that are in place to silence women and help men stay at the top, and to cultivate this thing and to just make sure that the patriarchy survives everything. And women have been trying to shake up this patriarchy for centuries, but we still cannot, because it's these people in power that are making sure that this entity does not get destroyed. So we're not getting anywhere. And that's exactly it. And that was one of my questions, is how are we going to tackle this? We need to, and it's just like any issue. It comes down to the roots of feminism, which is we need to make sure that our entire societies change, from the institutions to the people to education, and that women's rights, freedom, and well-being are put at the center of these, not to replace men. We're not saying like take away men's well-being and freedom and safety and put women's in their place. We're just saying put them at the same level, because right now what we're seeing, even in a country like the UK, we're at level 0 on something as as obvious as freedom and safety. But you have women who are just going to stop going out because they're like, well, I'd rather not go out and not get killed rather than risk it. And it's just like, no, we can't live our lives like this. We can't live trying to dodge men being abusive and toxic, pretty much.
With the Sabina Nessa case, obviously there was a sort of a period where they hadn't found who had done it, and he was still, at large. And at that point, obviously the media weren't taking it seriously for, I'm pretty sure we all know why, but they didn't do anything. But the police's response to that was, it's fine, we'll keep you safe, we will put more police officers on the street, and we put more officers in the area to keep you safe, which I think I saw an interview that one of the news agencies did with some people that were from the area, from a press conference, and they're like, we haven't seen any police officers. So, first off, they haven't done it. And then even when they have, that wouldn't make you feel any safer, especially when a few days later the news comes out at how Sarah Everard was kidnapped. And you say, okay, well, if their response to people not feeling safe, say, they didn't put a curfew in place, they say, no, you can go, you can enjoy your life, but they want to put more police officers on the street, when a lot of those police officers are corrupt, or they are, abusers themselves, because statistically it's the likelihood of, if you're with a police officer, their rates of domestic violence are a lot higher than just the general population, which should be a sign that something is wrong anyway. But even when you don't take that into account, they go, okay, well, we'll put more police officers on the street, but you go, okay, well, people aren't going to feel any safer. That's not going to make people think that they're any safer. So you go, okay, well, they need to change the full system. It's not just a case of change, the few officers that they think are bad, because chances are there's a lot more of them than they think. They also need to change the way that the entire system works. You said, Julie, any form of violence doesn't have to just be physical, emotional abuse and everything like that, especially when it comes from maybe it's an ex-partner that's stalking you or something like that. The controlling behavior is still there. You're still in fear of your safety, whether that is because you think that person is going to see you in person and they're going to do something, or whether it's because you can't leave your house because you don't feel safe. They're not going to take it seriously until that person does anything violent, and then they do, but it's too late for them to get involved by that point. So it's the whole system that needs changing, not just, they need to implement a few little things here and there.
And I think I'm just paraphrasing here, but I think it was the judge that was on the Sarah Everard case. They said something along the lines of how violence against women should be taken just as seriously as things like terrorism. And it got me thinking, like, for example, let's just say terrorist attacks were like increasing in the country, and it got to a point where pretty much everyone felt like they just couldn't go out anymore without feeling like something might happen to them. I just know for a fact, if that were to happen, men wouldn't accept staying at home and not being allowed to go out on the street. Well, that's exactly the same, but for women, but just on like a different issue. That's how we feel. We feel like we can't go out anymore without feeling safe. So I think that judge was right in the sense that, it is just that serious, because I feel the same way I would feel if, like, let's just say like terrorist attacks were to increase. I do feel like that danger is just always there.
Yeah. No, definitely. Just like a tiny comment on that. It literally happened. There was a pandemic, and it was like, for your own health, stay at home. Everybody, no, this is a breach of my rights, blah, 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 blah. And it's these same people that are now saying, well, if women feel so unsafe, they should stay at home. And of course it should be treated as terrorism, because it is terrorism, terror. And coming from France and having lived in Paris where there was like a wave of terrorism, yes, you grow more and more fearful. And yes, I've stopped doing it as much now, but I remember especially after 2015 and 2016, where we had a lot of attacks. I remember when I would get on the metro in Paris, I'd always look, I was like, okay, what do I do if something happens? And that's exactly what we're doing in this case of like, before we go out, while we're out, and until we get home, we try and make sure that, okay, well, if things escalate and my life is in danger, what do I do? And this is not one or two women saying that. This is most women across the country and across the world saying exactly those things. So it should be treated just as the pandemic was treated, or just as terrorism was treated, of, well, we need cut the issue at its root. And also with like the reassurance thing, like with, I remember the first thing the police said was like, the streets of London are safe, don't worry. Be honest. Say, instead of saying the streets of London are safe and trying to reassure me in that way, which is clearly not true, say, no, they're not safe, but we're actively working to make them safer. And don't, because when you're saying the streets of London are safe, but you're distributing alarms to women, instead of giving women loads of advice, give men loads of advice. Why don't we turn to men and be like, if a woman says no, don't spit at her, don't rape her anyways, don't stab her, leave them alone. And because it's not bearable for anyone. We can't, even for men, it's not bearable because there are still a lot of, thankfully, a lot of amazing men out there. And there are a lot of men that aren't rapists. So, like, yes, we're not saying all men, to go to all these people that are not all men, but even for them, installing this fear within women and installing curfews and teaching them how to defend themselves and protect themselves is not only oppressive towards them, it's going to be oppressing towards men as well. So it's really not benefiting anyone to just continue to ignore the source of the problem, which is how we educate men and how we educate ourselves towards masculinity and what it means.
I just read this tweet about a commissioner in the police force and how he was saying that it was basically Sarah's fault for not knowing that a police couldn't have arrested her at that time anyway, and was basically saying women need to be more streetwise and know the legal process. And it just goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, where it's like, you literally can't do anything enough without getting the blame put on you.
Yeah.
There was a tweet that went viral, I think, after they'd said that, where I think it was the Met Police or some police force had said that if you're being arrested, you should call out for help to other people or you should run away. And that was their advice. And then you go, okay, well, that's not safe for a vast majority of people in this country. If you started to run away from the police, it would not end very well for a hell of a lot of people.
Yes.
But that's their advice. They go, okay, well, if you don't know the legal system, just shout and run. But if you're not near other people, then shouting is going to do nothing. If anything, that police officer is really getting off on that power trip. It's going to say, okay, well, you're shouting at me. I'm going to get more angry. My adrenaline's already going. I'm going to take it out on you. And then it's going to be in a worse situation. But you say, okay, you should run. And then they go, okay, well, even if they didn't have a good reason to arrest you, they're going to use that now. They're going to use the fact that you've run to either be aggressive towards you, to hurt you, to put you in an unsafe situation, or to have extra charges against you, which, if you're of any, whether you're working class. I saw a tweet that was like, working class people can't run away from the police. People of colour cannot run away from the police. That is not an option that's given to them, because your safety would be in way more danger than which, there's been another sort of image going around social media that sort of says, if you are arrested and it's only one male officer and you are female, then you go, okay, well, can you call another officer? Can you get another woman here? Can you walk me to a police station or anything like that? But if you don't know that, even if you do, if you're ridiculously scared of your safety, that's not going to be the first thing you think of. But if that's their advice, and then their secondary advice to that is just shout or run, maybe you should solve the issue of why someone would need to shout or run if a police officer stops them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And also, disabled people. Can we stop excluding them from all? Some people cannot physically run. Is it so hard to?
Or disabled, you don't have that option.
But how do you say this and not account for the millions of people around the world that cannot physically run? People who can't shout. Again, what are we going to do about those? It's just how can you be so exclusive? What do you mean run? What do you actually mean?
There were quite a few responses that obviously were explaining the reasons why they couldn't run, but then someone also said what they're talking about in this case, it's Sarah Everard and the police officer, former or whoever, she would have been probably about a foot shorter than him, even if she was a ridiculously fast runner, even if she was wearing running gear. If he is a much bigger guy, his strides are longer, he's trained to be more athletic, and he happens to be able to run quick, even if you can run, which a hell of a lot of people can't, where does that put you? Where do you end up? You're still going to get caught, and then that person's going to be even more angry, and they're going to have more control and more power over you, and they're going to use that to their advantage.
Exactly. It's just that's the thing. Even if she had run, he would have chased her. We've seen, he literally premeditated. If she'd started running, he would have just grabbed her. Like, and, but that happens even when people don't pretend to be police officers. There are people that try to run away from whoever is assaulting them. They will literally run after you. This is the thing is, one, as the police, you should understand, as you said, there is an issue. If you're telling your citizens to run away from you, but you're the ones getting paid to protect us, but also, like, it doesn't make any sense. We've seen cases where people just get attacked. And, okay, Sarah Everard's case, she should have run away. Okay, Sabina, Nessa, what do we do? How's she supposed to run? He came from behind and literally just, like, attacked her. Like, so it just doesn't make sense. They just need, it's so obvious. It's like they're looking all around and the answer is like right in front of them. It's so obvious, but they can't get to it. And I'm like, guys, come on. It doesn't take much intelligence and much logic to realize that when, as the police, you have to tell people to fear the police, it might be because there's a problem with the system. Like something is wrong. And the fact that they actually tweeted that, I was like, so you didn't think maybe your credibility was on the line? Like, and my friend was telling me, he was like, because he knew I was recording this podcast, he was like, say it on the podcast. If you're driving and you get pulled over by a police car that is not explicitly like a police car that's supposed to be undercover, you're legally not obligated to stop. So stop somewhere where there's people and like stop at like a petrol station or something, but you have no legal obligation to stop. So don't, because that happens so much as well, where people just pretend they're not even police officers, they just pretend to be, and then abuse. I think
they also, so you shouldn't have to be telling people how to avoid being alone with a police officer. You should be hiring police officers that are okay to be alone with, and you should be training them and educating them that they shouldn't be doing those things and how you can fix that. That should be the issue, not stopping it from happening by just avoiding the police.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and like, you know, the commissioner that basically just said like, oh, it's Sarah's fault for not knowing this small legal policy. My thing is, if you know there's something like that exists, teach it to us so we can use it. You know, teach it to us. Be like, oh, women, like there's this policy, like this legal process where if someone, like, you know, you can't be arrested at this certain point or blah, 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 so that we can use it for our safety. But don't, when a woman has been killed the way Sarah was, or just in any way, don't then make snarky comments about how she should have known that this obscure law existed. Like, it's not her fault for not knowing, because none of us know.
They don't tell us, and then they expect us to know, but they only say it as a response and as a defense for an act of violence against a woman. Like that.
But also, like, I'm sorry, like, where are we going? So now every single person needs to know the law by heart?
Yeah.
No, it makes no sense. Like, you should know the law by heart. Like, now if you don't want to be assaulted and attacked by a man, you should know the law by heart. No, we shouldn't. You should be hiring people that you know are capable and you know are not going to use their power to do exactly what they're supposed to be protecting us from. Just to like jump off what you were saying, because obviously it's easier to speak about Sarah Everard's case because we know so much more about it than Sabina Nessa's murder, which still remains such a mystery. But again, Sabina Nessa's murder, we haven't had anyone try to kind of like be like, oh, well, it could have been her fault because it was 5 minutes away. It was still like, there's no excuse. There's nothing she could have done better. And she couldn't have thought that she was at risk going so close. I never ever think in my life when I'm going somewhere that's 5 minutes away from mine, oh, something could happen. And even then, no one apart from women are talking about the blame that needs to be put on men. People are actively trying to find solutions, which feels a bit better because since the Sarah Everard trial happened, we haven't seen a lot of that. We have seen a lot of people trying to point fingers at who did what wrong when a hell of a lot of people did something wrong. With Sabina Nessa, what I do appreciate is that people are kind of like, okay, right, this shouldn't have happened. But it's still like, well, okay, we're going to try and reinforce like security, but therefore oppression on women to make sure this doesn't happen again. And it's like, it's the big question of today of, are men the issue? Are they the sole issue? And how can we actually change things? How can we make sure that the streets become safe for women again in a way that doesn't involve us having to stay locked up in our houses 24/7?
I just feel like, in short, yes, men are a problem. I'm just like, I know it's not like a very political answer, but like in general, I'm very sick of men. And like, there was a point where I'd be apologetic about it. Like, I know it's not all men, but I'm just like so sick of it at this point where I'm like, I don't even care if a man gets offended if I say that.
Yeah.
Like, at this point, I have no sympathy for them. It's just like, it's hard because, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, we know that it's not clothing. It doesn't matter how much you wear and cover your body. Something could still happen to you. It doesn't matter what time of day you're out on the street. It doesn't matter if you're in a group. It doesn't matter like how many precautions you take to be safe. Like, something can still happen to you. So clearly we know like it's not anything women are doing. So that just obviously leads men like, okay, so how do we stop them? And this, I don't actually know, like, how do we stop them without it being really extreme and just being like, put a curfew on them?
I think it's also a case of, you know, we know that the issue is men, and, you know, I'm sure there's lots of things that we could sit here and be like, actually, you know, we think, you know, increased awareness and increased education, especially within, you know, organisations like the police and things like that, they need to have more training and things like that. But it shouldn't be on women who already have this massive stack of things that we should be doing to keep ourselves safe. It shouldn't be on us to sit there and go, okay, well, I now need to figure out how to stop men doing this as well. And actually, men can turn around and go, okay, maybe this is on us. Maybe we go, actually, you know, we know people that have done this. We know what they're doing it for. We know the reasons why. Let's stop those reasons. If the reasons are that they want the power, then you take some of that power away and you get people used to not having power, whether that is through education. You know, at a very young age, you teach people that actually it's okay to, if someone says no to you, that's okay, that's where it should end, whether that needs to be taught in schools from a very young age. Because if someone has an issue with that, chances are it's because they're not okay with someone saying no to them. You know, it's like you said with the, you know, you don't have the energy to, you know, to coddle men and say, well, you know, I know it's not all men, but blah, 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 blah. Even if we say not all men, if you are a man who genuinely cared about the issue of gender-based violence, that wouldn't offend you. You would go, yeah, you're right, it is all men, because they all have a responsibility to do something, whether that something is hold others accountable, or whether that something is to take some of the weight off us and make sure that there are things in place so that women are safe. You go, okay, if you genuinely cared, not all men shouldn't be a thought that even comes into your mind. And so we go, okay, well, even if that person has said that they're okay with us saying, you know, all men need to be responsible, until they actually do something, they don't really have a leg to stand on until they actually say, all right, in the police, we need to enforce X, Y, Z. We need to make more people aware of the issues so that they can see them at an earlier stage and things like that. Until they do that, nothing is going to change. It's on you. You need to figure it out yourself, and you need to sit there and you need to, you know, talk to other people. You need to look things up yourself. You shouldn't need to ask other women to you know, recount their trauma to you just for you to understand what it's like to be a woman. You can research that yourself. Google is free. You can go and look up articles and, you know, papers and anything like that you want to. Even if you don't want to do any of that, it's all on social media. The amount of things that people are posting at the moment in your fancy little infographics that have all the information on there so that it is more palatable for men.
Yeah, and like adding on from what you're saying, Harriet, kind of thinking about it more, I think an issue we have now is that men feel comfortable enough to say those kinds of things and act that certain way. So I think something that needs to be done, but within the male sphere, not necessarily like something as we as women have to do, is that they need to start calling each other out more when their friends say something that's slightly inappropriate about a woman, or say something that's like kind of rapey, something like that. Because if they get called out on it more, they'll feel less comfortable and confident in saying it. And I think that's a good start, because right now, clearly that's not happening in their friendship groups and social circles, which is why like you have such a strong rape culture going on, like covertly in workplaces, in like male groups, and like in university social groups as well. So like if men can just, you know, grow a little bit of a backbone and just call out their friends when they say something inappropriate and just be like, hey, like that's actually not cool. Don't talk about a girl like that. Or it's not actually cool that, you touch that girl like that. It's not good. That's a good start. Like, that's where it starts, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's so important for people, especially our age, that a lot of our friends are at university, whether that's undergrad, masters, things like that, and they're still in sort of those environments where you're not quite an adult yet, but you're not in high school anymore. You've grown up a bit. By that point, if you're deciding what career you want to do for the rest of your life, if you're earning enough money to live by yourself, things like that, if you are doing all those things, if someone our age sees something like that, it shouldn't be a case of, oh, we'll let it slide this time. That's just who he is. He doesn't really mean anything by it. If he's made someone uncomfortable, even if he hasn't, if that person's fine with it, but actually you feel slightly uncomfortable seeing them speak to someone like that, or seeing them act in a certain way in a club or anything like that, you should be doing something. But the amount of people that, would be our age that say someone reports them for something, but their friends will still stick by them. They're friends in societies or clubs, or their people in their course will just act as if nothing happened, and they'll carry on as normal because they couldn't ever imagine this person doing that. If they keep doing that, of course the violence is going to continue, because that person's then going to think that they can get away with it at that stage, and then eventually they'll do slightly more, and then it does end up in this situation where someone feels they have the right to just go and assault someone, they have the right to just go and murder someone, which no one does, but especially not in a gendered violence way, because they should have been taught from a hell of a lot earlier that that's not okay, and the other people around them should have flagged them up on that.
It comes down to two things. There's accountability for one, like people and men especially need to realize that, okay, maybe it is our fault. And not all men maybe, but all women, that for sure. And even if all women don't feel scared or threatened, all women are at risk today.
Yeah.
All of us. So that's what it comes down to. And rather than the initial reaction being like, how does this affect me? Shifting okay, but what can I actually do to help? How is this affecting others? Would be so productive. And then opening up conversations, because that's the thing is, if we shouldn't tell men what the answer is, but if they just listen for a tiny second to what we have to say, they'd figure it out on their own. And then, it's about responsibility. As a man, one, you have legal, physical, societal power to change things more than we do today. So it is your responsibility to stand up with us. And also it's your responsibility as a man to make sure that women feel safe. Yes, right now, because we can't do it for ourselves. So it's just, and the thing with the not all men and stuff like that is people think that there's two categories. There's men that are absolutely trash and do these things, and then all the rest of them. And there's a very big gray zone of the guys that are good guys and would never do anything like that, but are happy with these things continuing to happen, and that don't do anything. And it's about, if you're in a club and you see somebody attempting to spike their drink, rather than going to the girl after that and being like, don't drink that, go to the boy and be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And call them out there and then. It's rather than offering, and we're not saying stop doing that, but rather than offering to walk a woman home, when you see your friends whistling down or catcalling a girl, being like, what do you think you're doing? It's about these kind of things, these little things, because when people are called out, they usually stop. It is that power of like, but who's going to stop me? And it's what you were saying with abusive partners, for example, or abusive parents of like, what are you going to do? Nobody's going to believe you. There's no exit. It's this thing where these men that are doing these horrible things, which are not all men, I agree with that, feel untouchable, and to a certain extent they are. And for as long as all the other men that do not do anything keep letting it happen, these guys are still untouchable, and these guys are the ones that we're going to be talking about, and these guys are going to be the ones that we're focusing on. And when we're referring to men, we're going to be referring to them. So it's about calling them out, these little things. And then it just comes down to education. If we were to let men cry, let boys cry, because then they suppress all of their emotions. And one day, what do? They stab a woman walking by. Like, don't do that. It comes with that of also, of course, like raising men that protect and that respect women, and raising men that understand that yes, you are going to be said no in your life, and it's okay, and you shouldn't be entitled just because of your gender. But it's also raising men to be less stereotypically masculine. Like, I really believe that would help if we let men feel, if we let men express themselves the way they want it to. That would already undo so much of the trauma, whether it's in school, in households, within cultures. If we stopped actively teaching that men are in charge and that men decide and that what men says goes, it would go a long way. And even in school, it's things that are so easy. Of course, you can't teach kids to like call each other's behavior out, but it's just about teaching consent. About if somebody doesn't want something, you don't forcibly give it to them. Or teaching like, well, no, sometimes you're not going to get your way and it's okay. And teaching kids about boundaries and stuff like that. Then, yeah, when you get old enough to call each other out, once you've had that education, having that power of, do you know what, right now, I am in a privileged situation. I am in the situation where I have the most power. I need to use it and not just letting it slide because, okay, it has to be a situation where we call each other out, not necessarily in a mean way, but it has to happen. And that's what men don't understand. They're so worried about the not all men that they don't understand that they are part of the solution too. In order to get to gender equality and to be able to make sure that gender-based violence hopefully someday is eradicated, and to make sure that not only there are no more Sabina Nessas and Sarah Everards, but that like abuse at home stops, that gender-based violence that is unimaginable, like for example female genital mutilation, stuff like that, these things need to happen. We need to all kind of be together, and we need men to help and use this power that they were given to literally torture us physically, sexually, and mentally towards freeing us from this torture and this oppression. Like, that's, if they just understood that much, that you are part of the solution and we're not pointing you out to put the blame on you or to shift the power dynamics, we're pointing it out and calling you out so that you understand that the problem is coming from you. But that doesn't mean that you're evil. That means that if the problem comes from you, it is fairly easy for you to help resolve it.
I think especially when we know that the majority of people in positions of power, whether that is government or higher up in the police or anything like that, the majority of them are men. If you have that power, use it. If you want to actually do something, we can say, you need to call people out, you need to have this education, but unless they put actual things in place, whether that is more funding for, sort of resources for places where people feel safe to talk about these things, or whether they put in actual policies so that people, it's mandatory education for, I think there's one at the moment for, I think it's called Valerie's Law, which is sort of a petition to get I think it's compulsory training for police officers and things like that on the differences for Black victims of domestic violence. Like, they're trying to get that put into place. I think it's reached, however many thousand signatures you need for the government to respond before they actually look at it in Parliament. And I think the response was, there's training there. In that training, we mention what differences there are based on race. Why should we mandate it, essentially, when actually you need full things in place because people don't understand the differences. They're not putting the things in place to say, okay, well, there are massive differences there, whether not just in like the stages of experiencing it, but then reporting it and taking it further. It's incredibly different based on race. If that knowledge isn't mandatory in terms of training, then nothing's going to change because people aren't going to be aware of it until the people that are older and actually in positions of power put the funding and put the policies in place. They need to be doing that before anything can change, because that's how they can fix it. It's all well and good them saying, London is safe, the streets of London are safe, and then putting more officers out. But when those officers aren't trained in things that they need to be trained in, when their resources aren't funded so that victims of any form of assault, whether that is domestic abuse, or even if it's just you've walked home and there's been an incident, then you need to speak to someone about it because mentally it's affected you more than it probably has physically. Those things aren't in place. Those things aren't funded, and then they're surprised when the violence goes up and increases, when they're the ones that need to be doing something.
Exactly. And even in education, like in curriculums, it's in Scotland, they finally passed a law that requires LGBTQ plus history to be taught. And Oh, we're so happy to hear that finally. But that's the thing is, if you implemented Black history, if you implemented things such as LGBTQ plus history, it would allow, because it is an incredible amount of funding and it is an incredible amount of training, and also it comes down to, but who is going to train these people? So it's like, if from even earlier on you put funding towards making education more inclusive, it allows people to grow up with that knowledge of intersectionality. And so it's including these things and being more aware of the fact that we are not one big, like, homogenous society that would already do so much of that, because then you would have to train people far less later on in life if from childhood they were aware of concepts of intersectionality and of minorities. And if we included that, just giving people a sense of like, yes, well, inequality exists, differences exist, not everybody is the same, you can't paint everyone with the same brush, you can't paint history with the same brush. If you just included that element of intersectionality and of acceptance and of inclusivity, I feel like it would already do so much. And teaching feminism, the roots of feminism as well, because a lot of things that people don't know is that the issues that we're discussing right now and the roots of feminism would benefit men as well, because a big part of feminism is kind of dismantling toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is something that has consequences, that has extreme consequences on all our genders, because we've been very, very men and women, we've been very like bi about this whole thing, but every gender is affected by toxic masculinity. So including things like that, for example, in curriculums would then help, and it would just give that element of critical thinking to people, so that then when someone dies at the hands of a rapist, the first reaction isn't not all men. It wouldn't be like that anymore, because people would have the critical thinking of like, okay, well, and then when something like Sabina Nessa happens and it receives way less coverage, people wouldn't, someone on social media wouldn't have to be like, hello, is anybody going to talk about this? People, but with their own brains would be able to be like, well, wait a minute, this is not very inclusive. Like, it would just, it's just about just being a bit more open-minded at the end of the day. And the earlier we start doing that, it's the people that are at the very top that needs to start implementing that. But it's the people that have the most amount of like deconstructing to do. But these guys need to start implementing that, so that future generations do not grow up in the same patterns with the same toxic traits, and we do not continue to repeat this never-ending cycle where so many people, especially people that are not cis white men, feel oppressed for whatever reason throughout their entire lives.
Yeah, like, I just feel like more needs to be done within the male social group, within like men's social group. And then it's that, like, that's phase one. And then phase two would be between men and women. Like, you know, like, so I feel like when I hear the police saying what they're going to do, you know, following the aftermath of Sarah's case, to me, it's not good enough, because they're not even starting with that phase one. Like, they're not even thinking about the fact that, you know, they need to be more aware of what's going on between male social circles. Like, everything they're offering to do is just adding salt to our wounds, because they're not providing any actual solutions. Because, you know, if we're not trusting the police because we've seen that a police officer can abuse their power, then putting more police officers on the street and giving them more power to arrest people isn't what we need right now. But that is where they're going. That's not really helping the problem at all, is it? Because we can see that even the police can't help us. So that's not really a solution. The solution would be to reform the police.
Don't know how many times we have to say it, reform the freaking police. But yeah, you know, you're so right, Atia. Like, I think conversations need to happen within male social groups, without women.
Also, like, I think like the chief of the Met Police was saying how like Wayne was someone who slips through the cracks, and I'm just like, when something slips through the cracks, it shouldn't result in an innocent woman being murdered. Like, that isn't good enough. It's not good enough for you to just sit there and be like, well, he just slipped through the cracks. Because, like, how big are those cracks that someone like him can slip through? I think, you know, with his history and background, because it's not like he was very much a type of person you wouldn't suspect. He has had a very, you know, shady background that can indicate that he's probably the kind of guy that would do this, yet they still hired him. We need to rethink about what kind of application process that there are in place to hire police.
For, you know, a group like the police to then say that, you know, he was one of the few that would slip through the cracks, things like that. What they realistically need then, if they are going to say, you know, we check them before we come in, but yeah, say they would argue that, you know, his behaviour was okay when he started being a police officer, and then, you know, maybe it went awry somewhere along the line. They need to have the regular check-ins. They need to have the regular sort of, you know, education for those officers and sort of mandatory courses and things like that, so that they're made aware of the things that they shouldn't be doing, which, you know, usually you would hope that they would know that beforehand. You would hope that that wouldn't have to be told to a grown man, you know, what he can and can't do. But if it is, then that's what you need to be doing. They shouldn't need to say, oh, it won't happen again because he was, you know, the one bad apple, because then you go, okay, well, actually, there's a lot of bad apples there. They need to change the way it works.
And also, like, stop treating it like a PR crisis. Like, stop trying to save your reputation. Your reputation can't be saved. And it's not a slip because, okay, yeah, he was a really rotten apple, but the problem is not, it is problematic enough that he was even in the police in the first place. But again, thank goodness that most police officers are not rapists and murderers. We'd be absolutely screwed if they all were. Yeah. And also, like, okay, not all of them are murderers. How many of them are racist? How many of them are homophobic? How many of them are wildly sexist when they are here to protect people of color and LGBTQ plus people and women? Like, the issue is just so much bigger, and it just comes back to this issue we're trying to deflect. We're not asking who is at fault here. We're just saying that everybody to a certain extent is, and that because of everybody being a little bit at fault and people being focused on who is more at fault, whilst you guys try and sort this out, we are out here fearing for our lives and not knowing what to do. Stop trying to find a scapegoat, because everyone in society is a scapegoat. We keep sabotaging each other and ourselves constantly. So let's get it together as a society and try and fix things. There's no trying to scapegoat and pretend that these are isolated events. These all lead back to deep-rooted issues that we have as a society, and that is becoming urgent that we fix, because people's literal lives are threatened, and we're sick of it. We're sick of rules that were put in place thousands of years ago about who is better than who, meaning that to this day, we can't, when we are all very much equal and just as capable as each other, some of us don't get to live a life where we have the same opportunity, freedom, and security as others just because someone somewhere decided it wasn't going to be like that. It's time we move on and we grow and we stop just like pretending not to see the problem.
I think also what, you know, the police specifically, but also society in general need to bear in mind is when they say, you know, it's just the one person, and they completely ignore the fact that loads of people knew about it beforehand and loads of people needed to hold them to account, things like that. The full saying for one bad apple is one bad apple spoils the bunch.
Yeah.
Like, you can have one person and say, oh, it's just one bad apple, you know, we can throw it out, but the rest of them are all there and they're all then tainted, whether it is that, you know, that person is a racist and their views are then passed on to everyone else that they work with, which in, you know, consequence puts other people in danger, or whether it's that those people don't report it and then that person thinks that they can get away with it, and then
exactly,
it continues to go on and on and on, and then they go, okay, we'll kick them out now that they've done something a lot more serious, but it would take them murdering someone for them to do that. He should have been off the police force a hell of a long time ago. He should have had nothing to do with him from the moment he got a first arrest for indecent exposure. Like, there's no excuse for anything like that, but realistically they probably sat there and gone, oh, you know, that's fine, we'll let it slide this once, and then it's continued to happen, and it's happened again, and it's happened again, and then a few years down the line they then claim, oh, it's just one person who slipped through the cracks and we don't need to think anything more of that, to try and, you know, trick us into thinking that, you know, that's the only, you know, bad thing that could have happened, when actually there's a hell of a lot more people like him that are in the force and that, that are in society in general. It's like you said, it's a societal issue. It's not like it's only them and they need to be protected from this secret coming out that they think they're more important than other people. Those people should be educated from a very young age, and those views should be changed from any age that you can change them. That it shouldn't be okay for them to do that, but they're not willing to do that for whatever reason.
I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's this meme that's like, oh, when a woman is murdered or killed, there's literally no CCTV footage. But the moment you drive in the bus lane, the police have like 800 different angles of the same shot. And like, while it's a funny meme, it also does speak to a big issue of like, like there's CCTV everywhere. Yet when we need CCTV footage, we don't have it. And it's like, I don't believe that it's because, coincidentally, there were no CCTV footage where all these women were. I just think like it's a systemic thing. Either someone's purposely not trying to bring those footages out, especially in Wayne's case, because he is part of the police force. But also like, or someone's just not doing their good enough job of like looking through CCTV footage.
It's just willingness to tackle the issue. It's way easier for many, especially those in power, to just ignore the issue. But that's why platforms like these exist, and that's why activists and advocates exist, because it takes a lot of motivation and of strength to tackle these issues, but someone's going to have to do it at some point because it's becoming unbearable for all of us. And again, we're saying that coming from a country that, if you look on the scale of all countries in the world, is supposed to be doing pretty well. It's laziness. We don't want to look through hours of CCTV because it doesn't matter. We don't want to change the system because how do you even go about like just destroying the patriarchy? How is one going to do that? But it just needs to be done. As a conclusion, it just simply needs to be done. Just thank you guys so much for coming on today, for sharing your opinions. It was, as always, really interesting. To anyone that's listened this far, thank you very much for tuning into this episode. I will see everyone soon in another episode of Juicy Conversations with Julie.